Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Keith, and welcome to my review of UFC Fight Night, McDonald versus Thompson. The UFC brought its talents, its extremely wonderful talents, to the nation's capital here in Ottawa. I had the opportunity of taking in my first UFC event ever, and I was not disappointed. Now, there was some question in terms of why is this being held at TD Place? Why isn't it being held at the Canadian Tire Centre? I will tell you, it's simple. It comes down to three things. Location, location, location. Okay, I know that's one thing, but it was just so important I had to say it 3 times. You could not come up with a better location for this event than TD Place. It's central, you got a lot of restaurants and different shops just as you walk out the door. Why wouldn't you have it there? Now, of course, they could have sold a lot more seats than the 11,000 or so that they did sell if they were at the Canadian Tire Centre, but I have a feeling that they're going to be back. And I think they'll be back within the next couple years, but we'll see. This was a very entertaining event, and before I get to the actual fights themselves, let's talk about leading up to the event. The UFC did a great job of promoting it. Back in April, when we found out that the event was coming to Ottawa, they were on different media here in Ottawa promoting the fight. But even in the days leading up to the event, they were back on the same media promoting the event. Not because they were trying to sell tickets, because by that time they were long gone, but to say, hey, Ottawa, we're coming. Ottawa, I hope you're ready, and Ottawa, I hope you haven't forgotten. Well, UFC, we didn't forget. I think as soon as we found out you were coming, everybody started a countdown, and it was very exciting. Now, I love the fact that the UFC didn't just have the fights themselves. They had different events for those who weren't able to secure tickets. Different events like coming and meeting the fighters, meeting some of the Octagon girls, taking part in the weigh-ins, taking part in some Q&As. They had open workouts. The UFC knows how to put on a show. I know that a lot of times in my blogs I've compared the UFC and WWE in terms of how I feel a lot of the great things that Dana White and other promoters do on pay-per-view they got from the WWE. That's true, but I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing. They do a great job of promoting the sport, and they're doing a great job of expanding the sport. For somebody who's never seen UFC live before, not knowing what to expect, I really enjoyed it. Our seats were great. We had great sight lines, and I don't necessarily think there was a bad seat in that arena. I've heard some comments from different people in regards to depending on where you were in the building, it felt like a sauna. It wasn't the coolest day in Ottawa yesterday, that's for sure. And I'm sorry that anybody who might have had a negative experience at the fights because of the temperature. TD Place, I think, started to kick in the AC later on in the event, and it seemed to get better. But the temperature, I think, only reflected how amazing the event was in the sense of this place is getting hot. Now, in regards to the fights themselves, listen, I know a lot of people have made comments about how the fights were boring. So this is my take on that. First of all, to each their own. Second of all, although I've compared WWE and UFC, one thing you have to say, and one thing that I think we all know, was WWE is choreographed, whereas UFC is not. The UFC has no control on whether or not a fighter is going to go in and try to go for it and try to take some big chances and, do a flying kick or whatever. They don't. They book fights, and they hope that they're entertaining. I think that the booking that they did last night was very good because there was a lot of good Canadian fighters on the card. I found a lot of the fights very entertaining. One fight that I didn't find as entertaining was the main event, so let's talk about it. Rory McDonald and Steve Wonderboy Thompson, the number 1 and number 2 ranked welterweights, taking on each other to see basically who was going to be next in line for perhaps a title shot. You have to understand a couple of things. The first thing is that these two guys are friends, and I think the dynamic of watching two friends fight each other is always unique. It's not usually one of those things where you're going to see a killer instinct when you're fighting your friend. But the second thing, and probably more important, is these men are very good at what they do, and they have a lot of respect for their opponents. And you have to think of UFC like chess. If you're going to make a move, you have to think about how is your opponent going to react to that. Are you going to leave yourself susceptible to being countered if you make said move? I don't necessarily think we were watching a fight as much as we were watching a chess match between two very intelligent, very skilled fighters, which is why the fight, I think, went down the way that it did. While I didn't necessarily find the fight overly exciting, the main event I'm still talking about, I didn't find it boring either because you were seeing as they were skillfully trying to find an opening. In the end, Steve Wonderboy Thompson won, and Rory McDonald not only lost the fight, but again had his nose broken. So wishing him a speedy recovery. In the co-main event, Donald Cowboy Cerrone took on the Predator, Patrick Cote. Can you guess which one of those guys is Canadian? I'll give you a hint. Cote. Cerrone took down Cote early on in the fight, but Cote had fantastic defense to make sure that the damage that he took was minimal. Unfortunately, he couldn't hold it up because in the third round he went down and Cerrone got the victory. This was an interesting fight because it was at welterweight as well. We saw Donald Cerrone come up in weight, and we saw Patrick Cote go down. So I don't know what this is gonna mean for Patrick Cote's career, but Donald Cerrone is just one of those guys who just name the time and the place, he's there to fight. And you also gotta love this guy because he's fantastic on social media. You reach out to him, and chances are he's gonna reply to you. I found that out firsthand. So a lot of respect for for Cowboy Cerrone and for Patrick Cote, and hopefully we'll get to see him again soon. I'm not going to go through every single fight because there were 13 of them. So let me tell you high level my thoughts on this. I think that the UFC did a really good job with this event, and I think if you were fortunate enough to get a ticket to the event, you most likely had a good time. I want to personally apologize to the UFC for all of the asinine things that were being screamed by a lot of drunk, ignorant people. They do not represent the good people of the city of Ottawa. They do not represent the good UFC fight fans that came out. They just represent people who can't handle their alcohol. The only room for improvement that I personally saw with a live UFC event is, and again, this comes from going to multiple WWE events in my time. One of the things that the WWE does that I think they do a really great job of is before the show goes live, they do something of a countdown to get fans up, get them screaming. So when the actual event starts, they do a camera pan of the audience, and the audience sees everybody up and excited and ready to go. They didn't do that with the Ottawa crowd. So when the actual main card started, there's really no hype behind it. We just seemed to go from fight to fight to fight, and obviously we knew when the prelims ended and the main card started, but there was no change, I felt, in audience engagement. So I think there was an opportunity there. I don't know if at the pay-per-views there's more. There's no pyro, none of that type of theatrics, and I think they could have done maybe a little bit more just to get the crowd more engaged, because even on the walkouts, you didn't see standing ovations for different fighters. Even with Rory McDonald, when he came out, there wasn't this big standing ovation for him. It was still kind of in my opinion, somewhat half-assed. So I always think that if there's opportunities to get the crowd engaged, that we should definitely do it. But again, just a small comment on an otherwise very entertaining evening. I thank the UFC for bringing the show to Ottawa. We had a great time. Can't wait to see it back here. If you guys have any questions for me, feel free to reach out. CFL_fan on Twitter, Facebook.com/WittyWhittier, and WittyWhittier.com. As always, my name is Keith. Be sure to check out my UFC 200 preview, which I'll be putting up in about a week and a half. And until then, I'll talk to you soon.